So the great question is, okay, what is the sacrifice of the Mass, and what do we mean by that, right? And first and foremost, Jesus sacrificed himself, 2,000 years ago, emptied himself completely, took on everything it was to be man, and then, except for sin, and then he suffered, died, and was buried. Of course, we know he rose again, right? So, but the sacrifice, the one bloody sacrifice where Jesus became the lamb of sacrifice at the temple, and our temple is Golgotha, right? In this case, that happened one time in history. So there was only one redemptive sacrifice that God did for us. All the sacrifices that happened in the temple prior to that, that was what was called replacement sacrifices. It was when Abraham took Isaac up to the top of the mountain, and he knew and felt like there was a call to offer his son, because that's ultimately what was needed to undo the pains of original sin. Well, God did not will that, and God said, I give you instead a ram, an animal to sacrifice in the place of a human person. Well, so that's what started this cult of the sacrifice of lamb in the temple as a way of redeeming, kind of reconnecting the human person to God, right? Because we have this original loss, this sin that has kept us from him. Well, Jesus is the last lamb. He is the ultimate lamb. He is the Son of the Father that was willingly offered to on the behalf of all. He was the one that, like Isaac, carried the wood up the mountain. This mountain was Golgotha. This wood was the cross. And then he became the sacrifice, because ultimately he was what was needed to actually bridge the gap between God and man. Only the God-man himself could sacrifice himself so that we could be completely one with God forever, right? So this is key. It happened one time in this bloody way. But what the Mass is a representation of that one bloody sacrifice in an unbloody manner. That's what Jesus did when he presented the Last Supper, where he said, "This is my body, which is given up for you." He took the cup filled with wine and said, "This is my blood, which is given up for you." Right. So he wills that his sacrifice be continued in the present moment. So though the bloody sacrifice happened one time, he knows that human people live in time. And he wanted us to be present to that sacrifice again. He wanted us to be like John and Mary at the foot of the cross. And so he instituted this representation of the sacrifice of Calvary on the altars of the church, right? So when we take the bread and we lift it up in the air and we say the words of Jesus, "This is my body which is given up for you." When the priest takes the chalice and lifts it up in the air, says the same. What's happening at that same moment, in a mystical way, in a way that we don't understand and see, is that Jesus is being hoisted up on the cross at that moment. In that moment, that's what's happening. We are transported through that ritual action. We are transported back into that one moment of Jesus' sacrifice. Remember that Jesus is God, and so for him, there is no time. His human nature had time, and that was present 2,000 years ago, but his divinity, who he is, everything is the present moment. So he instituted the celebration of the Mass for humanity, so that we could always become present again in that moment where he offered himself. So it's like we're at the foot of the cross with Mary and John, and we are beholding the sacrifice of Jesus. Now, what the priest does after that, now this is a very important part, the part where the priest lifts up the bread and wine and it turns into the body and blood of Jesus. That's what we call the consecration, right? That's the words of the Eucharistic institution narrative. When we, right after that, though, the priest then literally offers what is now the body and blood of Jesus and says, Father, on behalf of your people, take this, right? It's a beautiful moment. In the older form of the Mass, when the priest was facing the same direction, you could really see that the priest, on behalf of all the gathered people, was now offering the very now body and blood of Jesus to the Father. It's almost in that very moment we are with the apostles when they see Jesus ascend to the Father, and Jesus says, I must now go. It's like we're at that moment where Jesus says on Calvary, it is finished, and into your hands I commend my spirit. Well, the priest is now, having gathered all the people, saying, this your body, Father. I'm now, as you've commissioned me to be in the person of your Son, I am now lifting all this to you so that we may be one, as the Father and Son is one. So that's what happens at the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass.